Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're just going to give it a minute to let the rest of our attendees trickle on in, and then we'll get started. All right, seeing that number slow down. So for the sake of time, I will get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our final Victim Rights Month workshop. My name is Brenna Chase. I'm the Director of Communications and Training at MOVA. And before I introduce our 2020 Special Recognition recipient and keynote speaker, I'm just going to run through some brief logistics. First of all, this is a Zoom webinar, which means you should be able to see the presenters, the ASL interpreters, and when the time comes, you'll be able to see the presentation as well. If you have any questions at all during the presentation, we just ask that you use that Q&A icon down at the bottom of your screen. We will be saving questions till the very end, but I don't want that to discourage you from asking them throughout. So any questions, put in that little icon down the bottom. We also have ASL interpretation and CART captioning available for today's session. To view those closed captions, you can go down to the bottom of your screen, click on that closed caption icon, and then select Show Subtitle. You should be able to see them then. And if at any point you're having any tech issues or need any guidance, please feel free to use that chat function, message myself or my colleague Charlotte Hoff, and we'd be happy to assist you. Now, as many of you know, we come together each April to commemorate victim rights and services across the Commonwealth. And although this year looked a lot different, we're so grateful that so many of you were able to join us for our many workshop offerings. And I encourage you to visit our YouTube channel where you'll be able to watch any of those webinars that you may have missed. On behalf of MOVA and the Victim and Witness Assistance Board, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has joined us, and thank you for all that you do day in and day out for victims and survivors, and for being with us this month to celebrate victim rights and services across the state. Today, we are closing out the month with a keynote address and presentation from our 2020 Special Recognition Award recipient, Audrey Morrissey. This was supposed to happen in person last year, but we are so grateful that we were able to make it happen this year. The Special Recognition Award recognizes a survivor of crime who has transformed their experience of victimization into positive change, healing, and leadership through promoting rights and services for victims and survivors. And Audrey has done just that. Audrey is the Associate Director of My Life, My Choice, a program of the Justice Resource Institute. As a local and national leader in the field of exploitation, she has served as the co-chair of the Victim Services Committee of the Massachusetts Task Force on Human Trafficking. She has also served as the primary consultant to the Massachusetts Administrative Office of the Trial Courts, redesigning the court's response to prostitution project. Drawing from her personal experience, Audrey seeks to help vulnerable girls avoid being recruited into the commercial sex industry and/or leave exploitation behind them. She facilitates My Life, My Choice exploitation prevention groups throughout Greater Boston and works individually mentoring girls who are victims of CSEC or are deemed high risk. Through Audrey's leadership and commitment to survivors, we are assured that survivors are empowered, supported, and informed. It is our honor to introduce Audrey as the 2020 Special Recognition Award recipient and our closing keynote speaker today. Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you, Brenna. And I want to really give MOVA a shout out because without you and your organization, you know, we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do at My Life, My Choice. So I also want to acknowledge the support that MOVA has given us in countless um, agencies the help and the support that we need to be able to carry out this very important work. You know, first of all, I have to say, like, I'm truly honored. I'm full of gratitude. I tend to, you know, go back to where, you know, where I came from. And to my surprise, I'm always amazed at how far I've come. And I have to acknowledge, with the help and support of a lot of people along the way, and you talked about, going from victim to survivor. When I think about the days of the combat zone downtown Boston, I would have never thought in my wildest dreams that years later, not let alone receiving an award, even working in this field, um, because I felt so alone. I felt doomed. I thought this was a way of life. I thought that, my mind tricked me into believing that there was, excuse me, there was no way out. This was it for me. Um, and I also have to say, when I was in the life, we didn't have organizations that acknowledge that this was a crime that was happening against children and women. When I was in the life, if you were on the street corners, you were arrested and charged with prostitution. It didn't matter if you were 13 or 30. That's just the way it was. And so for me, um, not having anyone doing outreach. I remember when the AIDS epidemic first hit, and I remember a van that would ride around the combat zone, and they would ride around and they would pass out condoms. Now, they weren't passing out condoms to support the girls and women in the life. The reason that they were passing out condoms was, their thought was, we don't want, their language, the prostitutes to infect the men who are coming from the suburbs, who are married and have families. We don't want them to infect them, for them to bring this virus home to their wives. And that was, that was the extent of it. We weren't treated as human beings at all. Um, Society pretty much threw us away. There was no my life, my choice. I think of, oh my God, if there was a my life, my choice when I was in the life and someone made a referral for me, I'm sure, I'm almost positive that I would have gotten out, because I think of myself being in, from a teenager until I was 30 years old. By the time of my 21st birthday, by the time I turned 21, I was kind of like old news in the combat zone and all the strip clubs. I had been down there by my 21st birthday for years. And so when I look back on where I came from, where I don't like to stay stuck too long back there, but when I think about it and begin to think about the steps it took to be here today receiving this award, it overwhelms me. One of the things that I am most grateful for is looking back on um, when my life, my choice almost began. And next year at our fundraiser, which we hope 2022 will be in person, we'll be celebrating 20 years that My Life, My Choice has been around. And I remember in the beginning, it was about, just training people on commercial sexual exploitation of children. We also have a 10-week prevention curriculum in which we go into group homes, schools, etc. Um, and it was about going in, running these groups and preventing children from being recruited into the commercial sex industry. And that's basically how we started. And then around 2004, I founded our mentoring program. And our mentoring program is where we pair adolescent youth with adult survivors for a one-on-one mentoring relationship. I was the first survivor in Massachusetts to do so. I think back to 2004, and then I feel like a couple of years after that, we hired another survivor. And to kind of fast forward it to today we have at least between 13 and 15 survivors who mentor this population of exploited youth. And so we've come a long way. I mean, I think back to going to see that first young person and thinking, what do I have to give her? And all I had to give her was my experience. I mean, I just went in, I told her my story, I shared with her how I was, recruited in, a couple of horrific things that happened to me while I was in the life, how I got out of the life, and how fabulous my life had become. And all I could ask that young woman at that time was, do you want me to come see you again? If you'd like for me to come and see you, I'll come back. I'll come see you every week. And she said, absolutely. And she is now at least, oh God, 33, 34. She was 17 when I first met her. And we laugh now because she said that she told me that it was okay for me to come back because I brought her food every week. And so we still laugh at that today. But one of the things that has remained consistent at My Life, My Choice, when a mentor goes to see a young person, they still go in and share with that young person that they're a survivor, take 10 or 15 minutes to kind of share their story with that young person. And we find that young people really connect with us. Because it almost feels like, wow, someone has come to see me that really understands, what I've been through. And that's just how we connect with young people. And so I've been doing that for a long time. And over the years, just training all across the country on commercial sexual exploitation of children. Also, I have to give a shout out to Justice Resource Institute, our parent agency. I remember when the recession hit in the agency that we started out with, Let Us Go, and Justice Resource Institute took us on, believed in us. I mean, I think of Lisa Goldblatt Grace, who was the director and co-founder of My Life, My Choice at that time. She was working off unemployment. At that time, I was working somewhere else, and we only had enough funding for me to work for maybe 10 hours a week. And I had hired another survivor, and we could only give her 5 hours a week. And I look back on how much we've grown with the support of Justice Resource Institute. They embraced us from day one. They believed in the organization from day one. And now it started with 2, and now we have a staff of about at least 35 folks. And we don't discriminate, but I always like to do this little shout out. All women ran agency. We're a survivor-led agency. And again, we don't discriminate against men, but I am quite the girl power chick and very excited about that. It makes me think of, early recovery when people would say, and I didn't believe it, when people would say, women do recover, women do great things. And I'm just so proud of the team that I have at My Life, My Choice. And I have to give that whole team a shout out as well, because if it wasn't for the team and how we've grown, each new hire that we've had at My Life, My Choice has really expanded our services to victims of trafficking, right? And commercially sexually exploited children. And so one of the things that I do want to say as well, before I go into my PowerPoint, and I know, and I feel strongly that if you're here today and you're listening to me today, and you support MOVA and what they're doing, I'm going to, assume that you're all allies. And so one of the most important things that a survivor needs in this movement are allies. whether it's survivors that are in the life that you're victims that you are helping and supporting on getting out of the life, whether it's survivors who are doing this work. What has really grown the work that we do are supportive allies. And I was going to do a presentation on allies in the movement, but what I will say is on that is to go on the My Life, My Choice website. May 19th, Lisa Goldblatt, Grace, and myself will be doing a webinar on the survivor ally relationship in the movement. So I would encourage people to really tune into that if you can, to really see how we've done it at My Life, My Choice. We have more survivors in our agency than any agency that is doing this work in the country. And because we know that this is how this work is being led, from the expertise of survivors, people who have been there. And we acknowledge that this happens to boys and trans youth as well. And so if you're here, I want to thank you for being here and being supportive and being a strong ally. And I would encourage all of us to really talk to folks about this issue, and get as many people on board as we can, because this is a movement that unfortunately still has a lot of work to do. And so with that said, it makes me think of, um, it's been a lot of talk lately around full decrim, the equality model. And for me, I kind of switched my presentation because I thought this was an opportunity to talk about this issue and for people to really have a clear understanding of the difference between a full decrim and the equality model. And so I just think it is information that is very much needed. And I felt strongly that it is a way that I can really take this opportunity to educate people on the difference between the equality model and a full decrim. And so with that said, I don't know if I over talked my keynote, but again, I was that person that no one wanted to be around me, because not only am I a survivor of the commercial sex industry, I was a heroin addict. I am proud to say, and today I will give myself a shout out, that next month, May 28th, will be 28 years that I've been out of the life and 28 years that I have been clean and in recovery, a woman in recovery. And I'm proud of myself, because when I look back again, who would have thought, right? Because I was that person, no one wanted to give me an award. If anything, they were running away from me. And so Mova, I want to give you another shout out. I want to thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank you for thinking of me, acknowledging me, and continuing to be a partner. I know that you're on my team, I'm on your team, and we just continue to do this work, because we need everyone in this movement to work closely together to prevent commercial sexual exploitation of children. And so with that said, I'm going to go into sharing my screen. And hopefully the information that I'm about to share with you will be useful. As Brenna said, after we do the presentation, what I would encourage folks to do is, I'm moving through the presentation, put questions in the chat as they come up. We will open it up for questions as well. But if you put them in the chat, Brenna can kind of go through them and get some of those questions answered as well. So I'm going to share my screen, and we will dive in for this presentation. Okay. Sharon, I can see you. Can you see the screen? Beautiful. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is the equality model, protecting victims and not predators. I'm going to say that again. Protecting victims and not perpetrators. I'm sorry. Talking a little too fast. I'm excited to deliver this information. So let's talk about, first of all, what is the equality model? The equality model, sometimes called the Nordic model, is a comprehensive approach to abolishing the sex trade by repealing laws that criminalize people in prostitution, provide exit program for survivors, and reduce the demand for prostitution by penalizing and holding accountable buyers, exploiters, and traffickers. So that's the piece that I really want people to understand when we talk about the equality model. We're talking about providing services, because a lot of the language that we're hearing, and we're going to talk a lot about that, when I hear other folks talk, I'm not hearing anything about providing exiting services for survivors, right? And I'm a strong believer, and I share this all the time when I'm training on commercial sexual exploitation. I always say, if people didn't buy people, you wouldn't be able to sell people, right? So it starts with the purchase of people, like any other demand. We've been around, we've seen, I know in my lifetime, lots of businesses close because the demand for their product was no longer in demand, right? And so the same here. If no one sells people, no one will buy people. So let's talk about the objective of the model. So the equality model decriminalized people in prostitution while continuing to prosecute exploiters and sex buyers. And so what I truly believe, when folks hear about the decrim, I think most people are thinking in terms of decriminalizing people that are involved in prostitution or exploited children. But we still want exploiters and buyers to be criminalized. And with the full decriminalization model, it decriminalizes the sex trade, including prostitution, patronizing prostitution, sex buying, brothel owners, and promoting prostitution, meaning pimping. And both groups agree that people bought and sold in the sex trade must not be prosecuted. But here's what I want to say, where I think a lot of folks aren't, a term that I would use, that are not playing the whole tape here. What I want folks to understand clearly, this is already a multi-billion-dollar industry already. So let me tell you what that means about the brothel owners. That means upper middle class neighborhoods where I notice, I mean, as a woman of color, I'm just going to be 100. In white upper middle class communities, they don't want detoxes, they don't want, you're right, anything like that, they don't want them in their neighborhoods. Let me be real clear. When I say a multi-billion-dollar industry, that means they can buy a home right next door to yours. They have the means to do so. It's not a low income industry. They have the means to buy a house right next door to your house, open a brothel where when your children are going to school or playing in the yard, they will see people going in and out of a home buying people. And I really don't think that is what folks are really processing and what people really understand will happen if we went with a full decriminalization model here in Massachusetts or anywhere in the US. So let's look at the societal objective. So the equality model shifts the systemic stigma, shifts stigma from prostituted people to those who exploit them. So instead of, like in my day, oh, she's a prostitute. Even when I was a kid, they talked like that. We remove that stigma because these are people, women and girls in the life, women as well. We're people, right? We have families. We have, you know, people in our families that might be lawyers, doctors. I mean, right? But because of being in the life, that stigma that carries. So with the equality model, we want to remove that stigma and put it where the people who need to really be talked about are the ones that are exploiting them. And we also want to reduce the demand, the economic engine of the global multi-billion-dollar sex trade. And so with the equality model, keeping that demand down. And I want to be, clear about that. It is predominantly men that buy sex. All men don't buy sex, but we want to make sure that we don't open up some gates where it multiplies of how many men are buying sex, right? So we want to reduce the demand. And also, we want to prevent exploiters from preying on cis and trans women and youth marginalized by poverty, racism, gender equality, and homophobia. And I'm sure, like, I'll talk a little more about this, but the focus here is helping people and not allowing predators to take advantage of people. It doesn't matter, right? It's painful. It's just a painful industry to be in. And we want equality. We want everyone to be able to get services, everyone to get health care, education, housing. It doesn't matter. We're all human. We're all from the human race, and we should all have the ability to get services and to be treated equally. Now, the full decriminalization model, redefined prostitution as labor. Legalize/decriminalize the sex trade and normalize prostitution and related activities. And so to live in a world where buying people and selling people is normal, because we know, again, it goes back to all men don't buy sex, right? And what drives up the industry, let me be real clear too about this when it comes to buying. What drives up the industry is the repeat buyer. The repeat buyer drives the industry up by 75%, right? So that's why the numbers, right? When you look at numbers, it might look like there are more buyers than there actually are, because it's the repeat buyers who are driving up the industry. And I know for me, I would never imagine living in a world where, or at my age, my grandchildren you know, thinking buying people is a normal thing. You know, I think of, you know, when young people, we don't want young people to think, you know, to get through college, this is how I can get through college. Or I don't want to go to college, but I can make a lot of money, people buying me. I mean, when I, excuse me, when I say that out loud, like I get goosebumps. But these are the societal objectives, um, between the equality model and the full decriminalization. Now, the equality model recognized that prostituted people are subjected to sexual, physical, and psychological violence and suffer severe trauma. You cannot think that it doesn't matter. Listen, someone buying you over and over and over again, you cannot, whether it's legal or not, you cannot walk away from being in the life without some form of trauma. Even if I'm 30 years old, I don't have an exploiter, I decided this is what I'm going to do. You know, it causes harm. And one of the things I want to say about that, we have folks pushing for this full decrim, but the folks that are pushing for it, who are in the um, sex trade, here's the thing: you don't know the trauma that you've endured until after you come out of the life. I think about after I came out of the life, and all of a sudden, for me, my body had shut down because of repeated buyers, that my body had just the trauma. I was so shut down because in order for me to be in that life, you have to have the ability to disassociate while having sex with strangers. I always like to use this terminology even when I'm training. Someone in the life are turning 10 to 20 tricks, right? So let's just say the low number, say 10 per day in a week. Just no one likes having sex with people they don't know. You have to develop a way to disassociate. And when I lost the ability to disassociate on my own, for me, that's when substances came in. I always say, thank God for substances, because if it wasn't for substances, I would probably be living out my days in a psych ward to this day, right? And so I want to really be clear about that. And the other thing, the equality model, is right designed to change culture from one that accepts the right to purchase people for sex to the one that promotes equality, right? And we know it reduces, I just said this, reduces sex trafficking. And also recognize that the commercial sex industry is harmful. It causes harm. And with the full decrim model, it promotes prostitution as a legitimate income generating activity like any other job. I have a friend of mine, I have to give her a shout out, Vanita Carter, and she does a great workshop on with adult women around um, a job. She has a great presentation on what do you wear for what we would call a legit job? What do your outfits look like? What do you wear? What are the benefits? What comes with that? And it kind of blows the women away, because it is not like any other job. Um, what it also does is facilitate the ability of individuals and networks from profiting from prostitution to do business um, business in communities, right? And so, um, really, I mean, we really have to look at this, like having people set up businesses as a legit business, and people, it's for me, I get tongue tied. um, it also protects sex buyers as sources of livelihood. And let me just go, sorry, to the next slide. So why would we, when we think about that, to protect their livelihood, and one term that I hear all the time before I go into this slide, one of the terms that I hear, when people will say like, it's my choice and people have a choice, but whose choice is it really? Um, does the buyer's wife choose for this to happen? Does the buyer's children think that this is okay to happen? Like, we really have to, who is saying this is okay, right? Um, and who is, signing on that this is a right? Um, People will have the right to buy people. Who really is agreeing to that, right? Which leads into the language. And language matters. And we all know that. I'm sure there's a lot of service providers on today. So we really know um, that language means a lot in the work that we're doing. Um, so the equality model, the language that we use, prostituted people in prostitution. And I want to be real clear. Here, we're not talking about children, we're talking about adults, right? Because we know they're two different, right? Um, and I don't even really want to say they're not two different people, because a lot of times the adults were once children who never made it out. But this is the language that we use. And also the language survivors, that is the term we use, and systems of prostitution and sex trade. That is the language that we use in the equality model. And I want to be really clear, and I'm sure people really get that we are talking about adults here, right? Um, Now, the full decrim model, the term that they're using, sex workers, sex work. I mean, for me, um, of all the jobs that I've had in my life, and I've had a few, being in the life, for me, never felt like I was going to work. Now, let me just say this though. When I was in the life, I might have used the term I'm going to work, but I had to tell myself that to make it bearable for me. You know what I mean? That's why I use those terms. And I'll say this too, just to go back to what I kind of said earlier. If I were in the life, if you caught me when I was in the life, I probably would have been, yes, full decrim. Let's do it. That's right. But again, it goes back to the trauma was not, I mean, the obvious trauma of being raped multiple times and guns to my head and that sort of thing, but we didn't even call that trauma. That was like, dust yourself off because the exploiter wants their money. You're just glad you were alive and on to the next one. But the real trauma, and I'm talking about the irreversible trauma, was not revealed to me until after I came out of the life. So before folks start jumping on a full decrim, I always say we want to study everything. We need to look at and do an honest study of folks who claim they're sex workers. What happens after you come out of the life, when the real trauma, when you're trying to be in a relationship with someone, be a parent, what does that look like after you come out? And that's what that's a study that folks really need to be thinking about before jumping on the full decrim model, because it still causes harm to the individual. They just don't know it yet. So when we talk about arrests, so the equality model only arrests those who buy and sell others for sex. Absolutely, we should be arresting pimps and exploiters. What, right? People who own brothels. And I want to say this too. Let's keep it 100. Anywhere there is an adult sex industry, there are always, always, always children. Always. So we have to remember that our children, I think of, when I was like 17 years old, again, by the time I was 21, I had worked I'd worked all the strip clubs. I was like an old timer in the combat zone by the time I was of age to be in those places. I got into all, like, no adult said, oh, you're a kid, you shouldn't be here. Right? I was still exploited. It didn't, no, another adult in the industry didn't, card me. That's not how that worked. So we have to, with the equality model, we have to hold other third-party exploiters and sex buyers accountable. And then for the full decrim model, they want no arrests of pimps, brothel owners, escort service owners, or sex buyers. So again, those of you, everyone needs to look at, again, multi-billion-dollar industry, brothels right in your neighborhood, and they have the ability and the power. When you even think of like the porn industry, big money, who would be supporting this are people, put it this way, a lot of the escort services brothel owners, some of them have the same amount of money or more money than the average person. So they have an ability to pull that off. And so both groups agree that sex trafficking survivors must be able to vacate convictions. So just really being mindful of that. And how does systematic racism impact human trafficking? This is where I get upset. This is where I'm, a woman of color, it really disturbs me. So let's be clear, when we're all here today, the work that MOVA does, that My Choice does, and I'm sure all of you are doing is in the name of helping victims, right? 40% of US sex trafficking victims are Black. So let's keep that up front, right? The average white household has 10 times more wealth than the average Black home. And so when I read this one and I think of a full decrim, does that really mean that someone of color has a choice? Do they really, if this is what they're up against? Out of 100 cases, 78% of the time the victim was arrested, while 22% of the time the buyer The buyer was arrested. So again, the buyer is already getting away with buying people. That's already getting away with buying people when you really look at it. Even here in Massachusetts, there's supposed to be, there's a funding stream that was set up to where when buyers are arrested and fined, that money is supposed to go, go towards services for victims. There's no money in there. What does that tell you? So again, and I always think about the privilege piece here. And what I want to say too about that, it makes me think about when I'm training and I'm really talking about the majority, for this to be a multi-billion-dollar industry, most of the buyers are upper middle class white men, married with families. 66% of them are married with children. Average income $140,000 a year. People like to think it's the creepy guy in the trench coat. Yeah, he might buy sex too, but there are not enough creepy guys in trench coats to make this a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? And so even though they're not the only ones that buy sex, but again, the repeat buyers, the upper middle class income is what's driving the buying and selling of people. So we have to, and that makes me think of, again, as a woman of color, I go right to the privilege piece, right? Now, here's a quote from someone that I thought was so powerful. If 40% of US sex trafficking victims are Black, then how did privileged white voices kind of lead this conversation? I thought that quote was when I heard that quote, I thought, oh my God, like I held on to it. And when creating these slides with the coworker, agreed. I mean, it's really, like, who's speaking for me? Like, we really have to look at that piece too. Look at the voices. Look at, I think about, there are people, and it's usually not Black and brown people who have a choice. We will agree that a white privileged person, a lot of them who are leading this decrim movement, a lot of them are already educated. And guess what? When they decide they don't want to be in the life anymore, they do have a choice, right? But do our Black and brown people have that same choice? So how does systematic racism impact human trafficking? And in a study by the Urban Institute, traffickers reported that they believe they received less jail time for trafficking Black women. So what I want to also add to that is, one of the things that we know for sure in a full decrim, the demand will go through the roof. Who's going to fill the demand? Black and brown people. And traffickers already know they receive less jail time, right? The FBI reported that 57.5% of all juvenile prostituted arrests are Black children. Now, here in Massachusetts, we don't arrest and charge children with prostitution anymore, but this is like looking at from a national level, right? I remember a survivor said to me, she was sharing that, and she's white, and she talks about the two of them being pulled over. They were walking in Vegas, and the other girl was a woman of color. He put both of them in the car, began talking to both of them, and he said to my girlfriend, who's white, what he said was to the Black girl, I know why she's out here, but why are you out here? And he let her, my white girlfriend, out of the car and arrested the Black woman. So the racism that we are dealing with in our society today, this is going to add a level, and which would be even deeper than what we're facing. I mean, we'll see some issues around the impact of racism and human trafficking. And full decrim will lead to Black and brown girls being sold, as I said, at an alarming rate. Because if we really look at it, let's just say the demand is this big now. Well, full decrim, the demand will go through the roof. Who's going to fill the demand? There are not enough of those women who are saying, this is my choice. There's not enough of them to fill the demand. The full decrim will lead to our Black and brown people being sold at an alarming rate, because when there's a demand for something, it will be filled. And children, and we're already dealing with our children being exploited. Can you imagine? We already know the numbers are high across the US anyway. Could you imagine? Those numbers would triple. And we don't even have clear numbers. We already know that the numbers of Black and brown children being sold, and children as a whole being sold, when you look at the big picture, with all children being sold, we already know that the numbers are low, right? That they're much higher than what's put out there. So this is why we advocate for the equality model. I know for myself, being a woman of color, and I think about the history of people of color and what we've gone through. It's real disturbing for me. So influencing systems, the disproportionate number of Black women and girls who are trafficked are a direct result of local, state, and national governments who refuse to protect the lives of these women, implement policies that harm Black bodies, and criminalize rather than assist victims of trafficking and abuse. So we already know. All I have to do is, I'm at a place now where I don't even want to turn on the news. It's like every day there's something, where our national governments and, aren't protecting people of color, period. Even if we just the term people of color, Black and brown people. But anyway, getting back to what we're talking about here, when we're talking about girls and women, this is why we need to hold systems accountable with the equality model, right? It's just a way to hold our systems accountable, right? By providing services and equal rights, services, equality. And it makes me, Black and brown trans women, right? Who believe, we'll talk about that as well. But it's pretty disturbing. And so those of us who serve people, I know for me, I want to continue to protect, to the best of my ability, the people that we serve. Like, I know I want to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. So again, the disproportionate number of Black women and girls who are trafficked. Oh, okay, so sorry, that's a repeat slide, which I like that slide better. Okay, here we go. So the adultification of sexualization of Black girls. Women of color face the double-edged sword of hyper-criminalization and hypersexualization. Slavery directly informs the current perception of Black women and girls. I think of terms, oh, she's so fast, or her body, right, is very well developed. The brown girls, the big boobs, the big butt, right? That sexualization um, right? And a lot of Black and brown girls not seen um, as children, right? Based on um, how their bodies are built, right? Um, and people thinking, you know, it's okay to buy them, right? And these perceptions are reinforced through music and media. And I'm always talking to our young people and our prevention groups around the music that they're listening to, which sexualizes Black girls and you know the adultification of Black and brown girls. And I'm always really helping them like helping to educate them to pay attention to what they're kind of bebopping to. Like, sit down for a minute. I'm not saying don't listen to it, but listen to it carefully. Listen to the messages of how Black and brown girls are perceived through music and the media. Like, really take the time, you know, because, you know, the B word, you know, the B word, the N word, all in the music, which dehumanizes people, which I want to say, what makes it possible to buy people is that the buyer, you have to dehumanize them. You can't see them as people, right? And so a lot of buyers, I mean, if he's a lawyer, he's not going to stop um, women in the law office and say, hey, on your lunch break, can I buy you? Why? Because he sees them as a person. So in order to buy people, you can't see them as human beings, right? So, and particularly our Black and brown girls and women, which leads me into trans women of color. So trans women, especially of color, are hypersexualized and hypercriminalized as well. I mean, like, I couldn't imagine what it would be like. I mean, I know what it's like just being a woman of color and what people think of, you know, um, being a cisgender woman, it's hard. You know what I mean? Um, but, you know, trans women, you know, that hypersex, you know, people just assuming, you know, that they're for sale. You know what I mean? Um, and they're criminalized too at a higher rate. And trans women are 4 times more likely to have an income of under 10K per year. So the sex trade becomes the sole source of viable income for many trans women. And so if I was a trans woman, I think I'd be led to believe, based on how society treated me, I get it. I understand why trans women feel like this is viable income for me, right? Um, because there's no fair housing. Trans women have even shared, even in a healthcare system, not being treated fairly. Youth that we've worked with, we've had to file 51As against programs of trans youth who've been in programs and were abused in systems and treated unfairly in child welfare systems. We're not even talking about adult trans women. We talk children, trans girls, trans boys. They're treated unfairly in the systems who are also supposed to help them. And so when you think of that, um, you know, I think of people are saying things like trans women are saying this is the only way that they can survive. Now, when I think of surviving, I was in survival mode when I was in the life. Because of some of the privilege that I've been afforded coming out of the life and doing the work that I do and the income, like today, I have some privileges as well, right? Today, I know the difference between surviving and living. There's a difference. Our society has come to a place where we think for trans women, that's the best we can do. We're on your team. We get it. We do think we should decriminalize and allow people to buy you, instead of really getting into our systems and fighting for trans people, right? Because if they had access to, number one, housing, because first of all, that's the first order of business before you even begin to think about education and other things. A person needs to feel stable. So housing, education, jobs, and healthcare. We should want to get our trans women to a place of living, not surviving. So the dominant narrative is that anyone who critiques prostitution is transphobic, but full decrim is transphobic. Prostitution is coercive for poor people. When trans women exit the life, they are still freaking poor. Still poor. I talked to, there are trans women that have been in my groups. I run groups in a couple of facilities for adult women, and trans women have gone through those houses as well. They left with nothing. They're still poor, still ended up substance abuse, the violence. And the trans women that have been attending my groups are not saying this will be a better world if you would do a full decrim. They're still poor and in pain and come out with nothing. And this perpetuates the cycle of violence. Because this is a population, and they, that have really endured a lot of violence. So implementation of the equality model, countries. Let's talk about that. Let's go through these last two really quickly in case we have questions. But countries like Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Canada, Northern Ireland, France, Republic of Ireland, Israel. Prostitution and trafficking decreased significantly. Sex traffickers avoid these unprofitable markets. No increase in violence against prostituted people. No evidence that prostitution has been pushed underground. And cultural transformation and attitudes purchasing for people for sex is no longer socially acceptable and deemed a barrier to gender equality. And dedicated services and exit strategies. Key, dedicated services and exit strategies. That's what we should be focusing on. Again, helping to build people up and teach them how to live, not survive. When I think of myself as a survivor, I mean, oh my God, I just didn't know how to live. And of course, I didn't have these kind of services, so I had to go through treatment through substance abuse, and women in my life today that have helped me and teach me. I had the services that I needed around substance abuse because that's what I had to use because there was nothing else. And I thank God for that. And thank God today we have programs that address, because you're stigmatized too, if you were in the life. So I love the programs that we have. I think of Lyft and their house that addresses substance abuse, mental health, and women who are in the life. Um, and when I think of dedicated services and exit strategies, that means someone dedicated to help me to learn to live and stay out of the life. That's what would be useful for me. And around substance abuse, because that was the treatment that led me out, thank God that those were the things that I had. And so that's the focus here. Now, results in countries that have implemented legalization and full decrim. So Germany, Netherlands, and New Zealand, the sex establishments multiply. The demand, as we talked about earlier, the demand went through the roof. And growing numbers of highly marginalized people in prostitution, meaning immigrants, impoverished women, and girls of color, including trans folks. So also what you would think about here in the US, what this means is then people will be, the term human trafficking will still exist because we'll be bringing people from other countries into the right? Like what's happening here, into the countries where the full decrim is implemented. And the physical, mental health of prostituted people, it's still very high, man. Their physical health, their mental health, and the state economy benefits from the sex trade. People are still profiting off someone laying on their back. Let's look at it that way. Folks profiting off someone laying on their back. I don't know about you, but when I'm working, I'd rather either be sitting at my desk, some jobs you stand on your feet. One job that I don't want is one where people are profiting from me laying on my back. And if the folks that are in the life recognize the physical and mental, they're really struggling with physical and mental health, and it has taken a toll on them, there are no exit strategies. And why would you? If the state economy benefits from the sex trade? One person that I talked to talked about, condoms on the street, people, because heavy drinking, people puking. Amsterdam, a woman I talked to in Amsterdam said children, like the women are sitting in the window, the people are still walking by calling them names, children are calling them names. So a full decrim doesn't mean now you're seen as, respected citizens. Like people still walk by those windows saying nasty things to the women that are sitting in those windows, and kids laughing at them. So it didn't change things into like a respectable work. So decriminalizing it, and think about that has to cause harm. I know as a human being, if I was sitting in a window or in the life and people called me names, which they did when I was in the life, but I'm talking about we're talking about in the world of a full decrim. I know how I felt when people called me names when I was on the street corners, in strip clubs. I'm here to tell you that's painful. That's painful to hear. So we can't look at this as, um, regular work. you know, it's again, I know that would take a toll on my mental health. So just really quickly, the equality model in Massachusetts, the equality model legislation filed in Mass would decriminalize people in prostitution, advance criminal justice reform by expunging the criminal records of survivors of the sex trade for all previous prostitution charges, and directing a sliding scale of income-based fines from buyers towards survivor-led organizations. So instead of giving buyers the ability to buy people, we hold them accountable and we give them fines that go into that pot that's empty as we speak right now to help survivors to get out of the life, right? And it established an interagency committee tasked with coordinating prevention, awareness, and education campaigns, address long-term housing and employment needs, and look at other underlining systematic problems and causes of the sex trade, among other things. So look at, with the equality model, seeing people as people, not holding the victims accountable. You know, if we expunge, you know, get rid of those charges so that they are able to go to school, and they can go to school, but a lot of times if you go to school and then you go looking for a job, that criminal record will hold you back when people see prostitution charges. And so this is a way, the equality model, we want to help all human beings who are in the sex trade by providing them support so that they can get to a place in their lives where they can, you know, live a healthy life with the supports of providers like a lot of us that are here today can provide for them, because we're the ones who can show them the way out. So that's what we're, myself and Sherry Jimenez and Nikki Bell, with a great team of other folks, meet and working really hard, meet every Friday, trying to get this equality model passed here in Massachusetts, because just imagine, you know, just like we always talk about, imagine a world without exploitation. The flip side, imagine a world where brothels and buying and selling people is a legitimate business. Imagine that. Massachusetts would come, and I've heard this too, which wasn't on the slides, like a lot of these places become sex tourism places. Can you imagine Massachusetts? Part of folks coming here would be for sex tourism, because that happens in countries where there's a full decrim. And so here's just a couple of websites you can go on, a couple of sources that you can look at for yourself. You know, and please, I just encourage everyone, please do your research. And the last thing that I'm going to say about that is Black and brown people, no matter who you are, Black and brown people will pay the highest price if we were to really support a full decrim. So I just want to thank everyone. Some other sites, if people want to kind of quickly screenshot that. And here's my contact information. And a quote from Mara Healy, I have seen the success of my life, my choice firsthand through conversations with young people who have survived sex trafficking and gone on to achieve great success with the support of this program. And so again, let's continue to support our victims, whether they're children or adults or trans folks. Let's continue to support our people in the way of which they need to be supported, meaning let's get people from survival to living. So I want to thank everybody who listened to this presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Here's my contact information and information for My Life, My Choice. And so with that said, I am going to turn it back over to Brenna. And Brenna and your team, I just want to thank you so much for this opportunity, for this award. It is truly an honor and a privilege to just work with such great people and the support that we receive and the work that you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Audrey. And the feeling is so mutual. I'm going to encourage people not to be shy. We only have one question right now, and I know there has to be more out there, but I'll go ahead and read that one for now. When is a good time to educate children to prevent sex trafficking? Should it be taught in sex ed classes?
Absolutely. And you know, the age that, another thing to do, please go on the My Life, My Choice website. We have a 10-week prevention curriculum, which is used in 33 states across the country and Canada. Here's the thing. Anyone, if you want to get trained on how to do that, run that, go on the My Life, My Choice website. First requirement is that you first have to have done a full CSEC training, meaning a full training on commercial sexual exploitation of children. You have to do that first. And then once you've done that training, you can sign up and get trained on our prevention curriculum. And we require at least two people from an organization or a school come to get trained. And once you get trained, for me, I find that in schools, for me, the most appropriate age is middle school age. I feel like the middle school age kids are still open to learn. And we've ran them in high schools. I'm not excluding high schools, but I feel like the middle school kids are like, you hear less of, I know. And your hope is that age group, even though we found in running our prevention groups that this has happened to some kids. But again, when we're working on prevention, our hope is that we're getting them that information, that prevention information before they're approached. And so absolutely, some schools, I've done it in health class many times. And we absolutely have to reach our youth. And so a curriculum is already developed to do that. It's just about getting trained on it and getting out there and educating youth.
Perfect, thank you. Another question, does My Life, My Choice only assist youth and teens, or can we refer adults to the program?
Well, I have to say, yes, our initial referrals, we take referrals under the age of 18. What I will say though, is that once our young people turn 18, we don't say, okay, you're 18 now, we can't serve you anymore. We will continue to serve them as long as services are needed. But what we do, we use other resources like the EVA Center, and you can look them up. As a matter of fact, Sherry Jimenez, her office when we were in person is right next door. We're in the same building right next door to My Life, My Choice. And so some of our, when it came to like younger adults around needing shelter, exploited women and girls who needed shelter, she's graciously taking our older kids, because some of our young adults who are no longer, some of them no longer aged out of systems or want nothing else to do with systems, right? Our child welfare system. So we've made a lot of referrals to her. And the other place in Massachusetts is Lyft, which is in Worcester, Mass. And Nikki Bell, they just opened a shelter there. But she also runs a house, as I mentioned earlier. And what I love about her house is that the focus is on women who are involved in prostitution, mental health, and substance abuse. And so those are the two places that My Life, My Choice, when our young people, like say we serve someone and then like they might have disappeared at age 19 or what, might have been doing good, but need services now they're 22. That's where we would make our referrals. To. And those are the places where I firsthand talk with adult women. I wanted to say that I run groups in both of their places. I run groups once a week, and those women and some of the trans women, they get really pissed off when we had a group a couple of weeks ago talking about a full decrim, and it infuriated them. They couldn't believe it because their lives had just, they're sitting in a house now with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, right? And the stigma, right, of being in the life that society holds on them.
Another question, how can I help someone personal to me who disclosed that they were in the life?
Well, find out what resources are there. Here's what, how I started the mentoring program. If you're an ally, if I'm answering this question to an ally, how I first started the mentoring program, I remember we had trained the local DCF offices. So after all the trainings and an awareness, they began to identify young people who were in the life. And so a lot of the workers felt like, God, that hasn't been my experience. And it started by them reaching out to me and said, Audrey, will you go with me to see this person? And so I was just going to do the workers a favor. I didn't know it would turn into a mentoring program. But the point that I'm making here, for your question, someone who's like, I don't know what to do. What they did was, I know someone who's been in the life. Let me bring that person to have the conversation with this person. You know what I mean? And so that works. So if you know of survivors or you want support and you're from this area, reach out to me. You have my contact information. If you feel like I really wanted this person's disclosed, Audrey, could you have a conversation? Or if they're open to the three of us having a conversation, then do so. And if not, just let the person know, that you're there for them. Never say I understand if you haven't been there, but just be there for them and finding the resources and services that they need.
Great, thank you. When working with survivors, do you encourage self-care practices? If so, what are they?
Oh, okay. Let me go to hiring. When I hire survivors at My Life, My Choice for mentoring, we don't hire unless they've been out of the life or in recovery at least 5 years. And I'll tell you why. One reason why is they're working with youth, with kids. And when you hear the stories of children, that can be re-traumatizing, right? So we want to make sure they're in a solid place. When survivors apply for a mentoring position, they have to interview with me first. They have to meet with a survivor first, where I ask the tough questions. What do you do for self-care? I want to know. I don't want to hear, oh, every day I come home and play with my cat and I'm fine. I want to hear, when I think of self-care, I think of I like hearing I'm still in therapy. If you ask me what I did for self-care, I'd say I belong to a 12-step program. That's what's healing for me. Um, the time off, even if you can't, it might be like I can't go on a trip. Take time off and just do you. Can you go get your feet done, your hand, but for me, or some people might say, it's their faith, right? That that they do for self-care. But I always encourage self-care, and it depends upon if it's for hiring a survivor or a survivor that's just getting out. You might have to find out what they like to do or don't like to do and encourage self-care. Like someone had to take me to have some experiences of self-care before, because I wasn't exposed to things. So I definitely encourage self-care. And if you're working in this field and you're a survivor, I encourage it. COVID has slowed me down. Like for me, I'm a beach bum. Um, aside from my spiritual and mental health care, um, I'm that chick that at least every 4 months there has to be a vacation. Like I couldn't imagine one once a year. I couldn't, that just wouldn't work for me. So I absolutely encourage self-care.
Can you share your thoughts about receiving funding from known sex buyers and the considerations of doing so?
That's a good question. That's a good question. We at My Life, My Choice absolutely struggle with that. I will share with you though, of a sex buyer that did give us a check and we did not cash it. And what we did was we reached out and asked if he was willing to come and talk with us, right? Because he had gotten into some trouble, and we felt like, oh, don't be trying to give us money to get out of the trouble you're in. You know what I mean? So he had the willingness to come and meet with us, and really shared with us um, the pain and what he was doing and how it affected his family. And we still didn't cash the check. And then later, because we have male allies, and COVID slowed that down. And just before COVID, a few months before COVID, we did an event. And he came to that event, you know. And so we really saw that he was dedicated to change. Um, and so my answer to you is initially, if they're like trying to write you a check out of guilt, no, I wouldn't take it. Find out what that's all about. Find out, and that's what we did. And he showed up. He showed up, which then showed remorse. And one of the other things I'll say about that, and it's 11:30. One of the other things I want to say about that is that one of the things I had to say to people, no, buying people is a horrible thing, but there are those, we've all made some mistakes. So there are some buyers that were like, oh, this, right? That can say, this didn't work for me and I've caused harm and I want to make a difference. Like this guy I'm talking about, we have to have the ability to let them off the hook as well. The ones who are doing the work and who are not buying, particularly if we want to have male allies in this movement. And this is a movement. The other answer to your question is we do need male allies. So maybe it might start off not by funding, but are you willing to head up, do an event, educate other white men on not buying people? So you don't always have to take the money. Give them the work test. See if they'll show up and do some work for your organization and do some messaging, talking to other men, because we do need that.
Great. Thank you, Audrey. We're getting a lot of thank yous and high praises in the chat. And I will echo that. Thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing this information, and for being a constant advocate for survivors. We appreciate you so much. And thank you to everyone for being here with us today. I know Victim Rights Month is over, but that doesn't mean we can't keep moving forward and celebrating victim rights and services and how far we've come while working to enhance those rights. Thank you all for your tireless work to ensure survivors are heard and informed and have access to fantastic services day in and day out. I hope you'll join us for our future webinars and trainings. I believe Charlotte's going to drop a feedback link in the chat, along with a link to our website where you can find more training opportunities. And we will be sharing this PowerPoint with you all, as well as the recorded session that will be posted to our YouTube channel. And with that, you are all free to move forth with your Friday. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you so much, Brenna, and thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.